admiring Sarah's dismount from the stage there. I don't know if you just, it's just how a pregnant lady gets off. It was awesome. I just loved it. I totally missed the opportunity earlier to this shameless plug, shameless promotion here. If you guys did not know and you did not hear yesterday, for the first time since 2008, that's a long time ago, by the way, the Lady Spartans soccer team are sectional champs, all right? So let's congratulate them. Now, I won't be fake or anything. Brenna sat on that bench really well yesterday, and she watched every bit of that match, but she didn't contribute much to it, but that's all right. Lawrenceburg next Thursday, that's going to be a toughie, but we're going to give it our best. But nobody can take it away. 2022 ladies sectional champs for soccer. So I would imagine that probably in a room with this many people in it, we have, or many of us have found ourselves in what is probably one of the most awkward and compromising positions that you could possibly be in. Now, I know myself, this is how I operate when it comes to my vehicle, and particularly the gas gauge. I run that puppy down to the last drop it's almost a game for me. Anybody else play the game? And especially nowadays, you've got technology that tells you, you have this many miles until you run out and you're like, I just want to test how great this is. Now, my dad, on the other hand, he's a lifelong mechanic, and his words to me were always, don't you dare let that gas tank get down below a quarter of a tank. I'm just here to tell you guys, I have never listened to that. Never. Have any of you found yourself in the position, how many of you have actually on the road run out of gas ever before? All right? How many of you have had to just pull over because you feel like I'm way too close, I don't think I'm going to make it, all right? As much as I have played the game of drain the gas gauge, to this day, I have never run out of gas. For those of you who have raised your hands and you have run out of gas on the road, if estimates are correct, you are among the estimated anywhere between 500,000 to 800,000 people who do that every single year. Besides flat tires and dead batteries and misplaced or locked in the car keys, running out of gas ranks right up there with one of the top reasons that people will call in or phone in or whatever they do for roadside assistance. And while it frequently happens, again, it's a bit puzzling as to how often it happens to some people. It may be easy to understand even a generation ago when on cars, gas gauges weren't very reliable. You ever have one of those cars where the gas gauge just bounces around all over the place? Or I've been in some of them before and they're like, oh, don't pay attention to the gas gauge, it's always empty. I'm like, how is this helpful? And how do you know that? I don't know. Another story there, but that's more understandable just a generation ago. And we have today, with our technology in our vehicles, all sorts of warning lights and dings and pings and everything that go on when we're getting ready to. I've had for the last day, not a gas gauge, but my oil's getting ready to be due, and every time I start my car up, evidently when it gets under 1,000 miles until your oil change, bing! I'm like, stop, I know, I'm good, all right? And yet, what do we do oftentimes? I know that I need to get the oil change. I know that I need to get to a gas station and put gas in here. What do? Doo-dee-doo. We're just traveling down the road, and then next time we look, we're like, I am 1,500 miles over my oil change limit, all right? I have run out of gas. I'm on the side of the road. You know, one might say that given our day and age that we live in, all the technology at our fingertips with our cars, who are actually just computers rolling around on the road, the people who run out of fuel, and I'm sorry to say this, all right, if you've done this, but you're without excuse. There is no excuse for running out of fuel. And this is where we find ourselves this morning. If you have your Bibles, you want to grab your phone or your device or the Bible in front of you in the pew. Matthew chapter 25 is where we're at. A group of us have already read the first 13 verses this morning, but we're going to read them again. But this is where we find ourselves in the story, in the flow of things today, as a group of, shall I say it, as Jesus would call them, a foolish group of party guests find themselves without fuel. Specifically in this story, without oil. And I would say it, as I just said it, without excuse. There's no excuse as to why this group finds themselves fuel-less. Now, last week, if you remember, we were in Matthew 24, and we talked about this concept. It was like the main thing that I hope everybody got. And so we're going to try it out here this morning. 2 words here. It was what? Be what? Oh, yes. Brian, they listened. You know what? That's a moment for a preacher when you hear people like repeat back. You're like, yes. It warms my heart, guys. All right. Be ready is what we talked about last week. We talked about readiness through specifically faithfulness. You remember the wise servant or the faithful servant and the foolish servant is what we talked about last week. This week we're going to talk and continue to talk because I want to keep talking about the importance of being ready. But this week we are going to talk about readiness through watchfulness. And bigger than that, this is the idea that I want you to carry with you as you leave here today, as we're talking, and as I'm talking through Matthew 25, the first 13 verses, is here's what Jesus really, I think, is saying in these verses. If you get nothing else this morning, because this is sometimes a little bit of a wacky parable, like what's he trying to say here? Who's he really talking about? What do all these people represent? Brush all that away. We're not playing the game of who does this represent today. This is the essence of what he's saying. Church, believers, I want you to be able to finish well. Now, we know this in life, right? It's never great to just simply start something. We have to do what? We also have to finish it, and not finish it with like a thud, like, oh, I got that done. No, we finish strong and we finish well. Jesus talks about it a lot. The New Testament talks about it. Paul talks about it so much in his writings of what it means to finish well. And specifically today, Jesus will talk about to be watchful, or as I'll term, and this is going to sound like an oxymoronic statement, all right? But what Jesus, I think, is saying is that we need to be patient, active, and prepared in our waiting. Now you may like, those words don't really seem like they go together. Like patient means that we just kind of like sit there, right? Ryan, no, it doesn't. That's not what Jesus says at all. This is Colin was talking about in his communion meditation. We don't just do the works of God here in this world and in this life all the way to the end and finish well. We do that for all of eternity. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that this morning, starting in Matthew 25, verse 1. Then, and the then is there, by the way, because he is continuing on his line of thought from Matthew 24. Remember, we talked last week that Matthew 24 and Matthew 25 are part of one block of teaching called the Olivet Discourse. And so he's going to continue his line of thinking, what he's been talking about. My return is coming. Be ready. Be watchful. Be prepared. The kingdom of heaven will be like, whenever you see those words, by the way, they should throw off an alarm in you that Jesus is getting ready to give you a parable. A story that's going to illustrate some sort of a spiritual or a higher meaning, all right? The kingdom of heaven will be like 10 bridesmaids who took their lamps. The actual word there is not lamps. It's a Greek word lampos, which means torches, all right? So they're carrying not just like little, like the wick with the oil in it, with the glass bulb around. No, they're like torches, all right, is what they're carrying around here. 5 of them were foolish, and 5 of them were wise. So he's picking up themes that he talked about in the parable at the end of Matthew 24 and continuing to drive them home here. So he says the 5 were foolish. They were foolish because they didn't take enough olive oil for their lamps. It's a very interesting translation there. And honestly, it's not the best translation. We'll talk about that here in just a minute. But the other 5 were wise enough to take along extra oil. Now, when the bridegroom was, and what's that word say right there? When the bridegroom was delayed. Now, that is a big word all throughout Matthew 24 and 25. He says it at least 3, if not 4 times, this concept of a wait, of a delay. All right? Jesus is trying to clue everybody in. This is going to take a while for me to get back. So, in this story, while he was delayed, all of the bridesmaids became drowsy and they fell asleep. And why would they have fallen asleep? Because what's the very next verse say? What time is it? It's midnight, all right? This is when normal people sleep, all right? Now, back in my younger days, midnight meant nothing to me. I just kept on going beyond that, all right? Now I'm a little older, and midnight seems really late to me, all right? I'm snoozing by then. At midnight, all of the bridesmaids were roused by the shout, "Look, the bridegroom is coming. Come out and meet him." All of the bridesmaids got up and prepared their lamps. Then the 5 foolish ones, I'm inserting a phrase in here, they freaked out. Like, oh no, we are not ready. We are not prepared. They asked the other ones, the wise ones, please give us some of your oil because our lamps are going out. But the others replied, we don't have enough for all of us. Go to a shop and buy some for yourselves. But while they were gone to buy oil, the bridegroom came. Then those who were ready went in with him to the marriage feast, and the door was locked. Now later, when the other 5 bridesmaids returned, they stood outside calling, Lord, Lord, open the door for us. And this verse right here, guys, this is a stark, stark verse. He called back, believe me, I don't know you. Have you ever had this moment in your life where you feel like, hey, you should really know who I am, and somebody looks at you and they're like, not ringing a bell? This is what he says here. In a much grander and much more important way, you're not coming into the feast. You're not going to party and celebrate with us tonight. You just stay out here. I don't really know you. And then Jesus gives what I think is the wrap up to the entire parable. If you're like, what in the world is this guy talking about with these bridesmaids and foolish and wise and shutting out and oil and all this stuff? Verse 13. So you too must, here's a phrase again he uses a lot, keep watch, for you do not know the day or the hour of my return. Now, every culture has its own way of celebrating a marriage, a wedding ceremony. And it also has, now I don't usually tell when I marry people, do you realize when a couple gets married the wide number of inherent risks that there are in the wedding ceremony? Anything could go wrong at any time. Now, most of the time, what happens is everything, at least on the outside, all right, maybe the wedding party knows, like something did not go right there. Most people don't. It all looks cutesy and lovey. There are a number of things that can go wrong in a marriage celebration. The story is told, in fact, of a family who was so absolutely worried about something going wrong. Specifically, they were worried about the primary car that was going to take them to the church for the wedding ceremony. They were so worried that it would break down that they hired a second car to follow them close behind, empty, just in case the first one broke down. Like, we worry about stuff like this, all right? We want to be prepared in case the absolute worst happens in life. Now, part of understanding this parable, I feel like if I just keep on going and just work through things, you'll be like, there's some things I don't get here. You wouldn't, because there are a lot of cultural things that are going on here in these 13 verses specifically, that if you don't have at least a basic understanding of ancient Near East culture, or specifically Jewish culture and what happened with Jewish weddings, you're going to be just a smidge lost. In the Middle East, even to this very day, as I stand here, there's probably a wedding going on somewhere, and it's likely, or they're getting ready for a wedding, it's likely that they're doing things just like they did in Jesus' day. The scene described here in Matthew 25 would make perfect sense to them. It doesn't really mostly make sense to us. Why in the world are they having a wedding in the middle of the night, at midnight? All right, I don't know about you. I've heard of some really weird days and some really weird times for weddings, but I've never heard somebody being married at midnight. Now, maybe you have, and you're like, well, I can prove you wrong, Ryan. I have. It's very, very unusual. Everything around this wedding, actually, in Matthew 25 is a little bit unusual. Why in the world are we carrying torches around, all right? This sounds very barbaric. It's a wedding. We're not used to wedding ceremonies in the middle of the night, torchlit processions, but they're actually quite common. Actually, what would happen with a Jewish wedding and everything leading up to it is that the marriage ceremony and everything started way before that night. It would happen in several stages across the lives of the bride and the groom and their families. And specifically, as it had to do with the wedding evening, there would be many stops that the groom would have to make along the way that could delay his getting to his bride. And again, on a wider level, understanding Jewish cultural approaches to marriages and the wedding ceremony will shed some light on what's going on here. And again, you have to remember this, guys, right? I call this, we drop into the story in Matthew 25 as like 21st century Western people, everybody that Jesus was talking to in Matthew 25, they understood what he was talking about. He didn't have to lay all this out. Like, they understood what a wedding ceremony was. And specifically, they understood everything that led up to it. There were some very specific stages. First, for the bride and groom was the engagement phase. Now, the engagement phase for us is completely different in our culture, all right? That's when we ask and the guy gets all sweaty and his pits are so I can't even get words out of my mouth. And that happens way before in a Jewish culture. The engagement is often done at a very young age. Many times when the bride and groom are actually just kids, it's what we would call around the world today and what we understand even as what? An arranged marriage, all right? Which, by the way, I'm just going to tell you this, they're kind of making a comeback, all right? And if you really think about it, I mean, we joke all the time, Brylan and little Mac, all right, Chalker, those two are destined to be together. We're really trying to push this, all right? But it looks weird to us. We're like, really? They didn't even have a chance to come together and see if they love each other, they're compatible, and that didn't work. That didn't happen in a Jewish culture. It may seem very weird to us, it may seem very archaic to us, but I want you to notice why in the world they thought it was so very important to arrange marriages at an early age. For every single couple and for the nation as a whole of Israel, practicing this custom of an arranged marriage from a very early age ingrained in each single person that love is a commitment. That is very important to hold on for this parable as we apply it to that, all right? So hold on to that idea. They understand, boy and girl, all right? You don't really know this person, and you really don't know this person, but you're going to be together for life. All right, we're in this, and we're going to make this work. We are committed to this. Love is a commitment, not a feeling. What would happen is that a legally binding contract would be drawn up between the fathers. It'd be struck during this engagement time. And next was what they called a betrothal period, where a bride price would be determined and it would be paid by the family of the groom. See, things are always backwards, all right? In that culture, that doesn't work. That's not how we do things here in America. Well, that's how they did things in Jesus' day. They sealed the covenant between the families during this time. Now listen to this. At this early stage, even before the typical wedding ceremony, vows were exchanged at this betrothal time. And at this point, after vows were exchanged, a contract had been drawn up, agreed to, a bride price had been paid, they were legally married at this point, even before your typical wedding ceremony. So binding was the agreement in Jesus' day in that culture that to get out of it required a divorce. You're like, that's weird, they're not even married yet. Why would they need to be divorced? That's how serious it was. That's how long-standing marriage was in the Jewish culture. After the bride price and the vows and the agreement was entered into, it was customary. Now listen to this. This makes it make sense in Matthew 25. It was customary for the groom to go away for there was no set time period, but generally it lasted 1 year. He would go away, and I heard Brian talking about this morning. He would go away and do what, Brian? What would the bridegroom do? What did Jesus say in John 14? I'm going away to do what? Prepare a place for you. He would go, I've got to make sure that I've got a really great job so I can support my bride. I have to make sure that we've got a pretty nice digs to live in. And by the way, most of the time the digs were just an added-on room to mom and dad's house. Yay! That doesn't strike up everybody loves Raymond, does it to you at all? Marie coming over, hey, it's just weird, all right? That part, arranged marriage, I can kind of dig. Adding on a room to mom and dad's house, weird. All right, let's not do that. Let's not bring that back. But this is what he would do. He would go away approximately a year or so, maybe sometimes less, maybe sometimes more, and he's preparing a place. After that year or so away, the bridegroom would return to get his bride. By the way, as you're hearing all of this, doesn't it conjure up in you all of the terms and images about Jesus coming for his bride and coming for his church, and that he's going away to prepare a place, but he will be back again to get his church? He would return to get his bride from her parents' home. And again, since there was no set timetable for his return, often it was unannounced and a bit of a surprise when he would arrive. But everybody in the wedding party and everybody that was going to celebrate was expected to be ready. Be ready whenever. He could come whenever. Everyone was very excited. They were anticipating his return. The bridal party, which takes center stage, by the way, in this, all right? We hear about the bridegroom, but we don't really get much about him, except for he's kind of a mean guy because he shut a door in some of these ladies' face, all right? We don't get anything about the bride, though, do we? Nothing. Not even one mention. All of the story is centered on the bridesmaids. The bridal party, these bridesmaids would know it had been about a year, and so they knew they had to be waiting, they had to be ready, they had to be watching, they had to be prepared because he could come at a time, and this is why Jesus says this, when you least expect. There's a reason he uses these words. Once the bridegroom had his bride, a festive procession would lead them out of town, or sometimes they would take this really long route around town if they lived in the same town. And they would take the bridal party and everybody celebrating to the groom's home that he had prepared for his love, where a marriage feast would be celebrated. And finally, after all of this and the partying had died down, usually the best man, the friend of the groom, would ceremonially take both the hand of the bridegroom and the bride, and he would join them together. And that was a sign, guess what? Everybody scat, all right? That's when they would complete their marriage. That is all of everything that happens in a Jewish way, like not everything, all right? But most everything that helps you to understand this parable a little better. All of that cultural knowledge sets the tone, and it serves as a backdrop for the teaching that Jesus gives here in Matthew 25. The parable itself deals with the last couple phases of a traditional Jewish wedding and marriage ceremony. Jesus was talking, as he began to last week in Matthew 24, of his imminent return. I am coming. Bank on that. Guarantee it. It is happening. I will come. And in this teaching, continued in Matthew 25, he is essentially saying what we did last week, and you guys have already repeated, be ready. Be ready. Please be ready. And yet, as many times as he probably said that, he sets up in the story, there were some who were not ready, right? More specifically, I think what Jesus is trying to say here is that be watching while you're waiting to be prepared. Jesus lays out a scenario here that involves a wedding party, an entourage, if you will, of 10 bridesmaids. They were responsible for attending to everything that the bride needed on that day when the groom would come to get her. They were to announce, they were to be ready, they were to do everything that it took necessary to make this party the best thing that it could be. And I want you to notice here as we read through that all 10 of these bridesmaids really look the same, don't they? They present themselves the same on the outside. They were all there. They were all watching. They were all waiting for the groom. And this is interesting because sometimes people will... they'll read this parable and they're like, well, here's the deal of what Jesus is saying. He's saying, don't you suckers be lazy. It's not what the parable is about, by the way, because how many of these bridesmaids fall asleep? All 10. It's normal. It's natural. It's midnight, and they're like, you know what? I don't know if it's really going to happen tonight, but I'm tired and I'm going to sleep. All right? They all fall asleep. They were living life. They didn't know when the groom was going to come back. But when they were awakened, and this is the dividing point in the entire story, 5 were ready and prepared, and 5 were not. They were utterly unprepared. They are painted in this parable as wise and as foolish. I actually love the word here for foolish. The word used here is the Greek word moros. Do you know what that sounds like? Moron. It is actually where we get our word moron from. So Jesus is saying here, there are 5 really wise ladies and there are 5 morons. I love Jesus, by the way. The way he just put things in there. He's like, hey, by the way, when Jesus spoke that, he's like, over 2,000 years from now, this is really going to hit deep, all right? Morons. Some other people have titled these 5 unwise bridesmaids silly girls. Just 5 silly girls, foolish girls. These 5 foolish ladies knew something was coming, But they were caught completely off guard. Again, all 10 really were caught off guard, but 5 of them were prepared. These 5 silly girls are unprepared. They had the source for the light. They had their torch. They had their lampas. But what was their problem? They had nothing to light it with, did they? Which, here we go, dramatic moment. I really want you to think about this because I think, and Brian even kind of pointed to this morning, because I think that a lot of us show up and we read parables like this and we're like, that's cool. Like, I obviously have to be one of the 5 wise bridesmaids, don't I? Do you? Do you? Is it possible that maybe you're potentially carrying a torch around? I got it. I got my Bible. I got my offering. I got my good works. But you have nothing to keep your flame going. Obviously, it is so obvious to me in Matthew 25 that Jesus is utterly concerned that there are a significant number of people who profess to follow him but are not really ready for him. It's actually a little deeper than that. People who profess, oh, I know you, Jesus, but they really don't. That's very scary. Now, I don't want you to take this and be like, oh, so what Jesus is saying is like 50% of the people in the church aren't really believers and 50% of the people. Don't do that. Jesus is not trying to play math here with us, all right? He's not trying to play ratios. That's not what he's saying here. Let me put it this way. I want you to think about this. How wise, how smart, how prepared do you think it would be, and how great do you think it would be that you are in the classroom, you find yourselves there, and that's the time, as the test is in your hand, you're like, you know what? I should really study. It's a little too late then, isn't it? All right? I think a lot of us have found ourselves in that situation where we're like, I really did not prepare well for this test. And what happens to us? The heart starts beating, we start sweating, we start breathing really heavy, all right? Why is it that we take sometimes the same tactic with our salvation and spiritual things? Oh, I got time. I'm going to go do this thing, and then that thing, and then that thing over there, and then I'll come back to this when I'm ready, until the moment that we're standing before Jesus, and he says, what did you do? And this is not rhetorical. This is not made up. This is not maybe it will happen. Every single one of us will appear before the Savior someday. We're going to talk about this in a few weeks. Some people to be judged for all of eternity and to be banished out of the presence of God to an eternity and a torment in hell. That's a very real thing. But for most of us, we're going to appear before Jesus and we're like, whew, we escaped that one. Oh, there's a judgment for believers too. And like, have you ever had that moment where your mom or dad looked at you and they didn't even say anything at you? They just glared at you and you were just like, Jesus will say words like this, like, what did you do with what I gave you? And there's not going to be any bumbling or stumbling or uhs and ahs. We will give an account. This is what I did. This is what I did with what you gave me. Why do people do that? Why do kids go into the classroom and sit down and think, this is the time for me to prepare for my test? Why do we do the same thing on a much more grand scale with eternal things? It's because what? People think I have what? Time. Oh, I've got all the time in the world. You want me to tell you what Jesus would say to you? And would say to people that think that? You ready? I've already said the word, moron. That is so silly and that is so foolish for you to think that. Therein lies the problem of the entire parable. And I want you to listen to this line I came across. Somebody has said it this way: the most dangerous lie that we could ever believe in our lives is not there is no God and not there is no hell. The most dangerous thing that we could believe in our mind and that Satan really wants us to believe is what? There is no hurry here. You have time. You're so young. You're so full of energy. You've got another 10 years. You have another 15 years until you look up and you realize, I'm in the last leg of my life. And again, as Colin said, I have to make sure that at every moment of my life, not that I'm just doing things for God just to do things, but I am working at what He has given me to do. I am being obedient to what He is giving me to do. I want you to think of it this way, because most people will say it this way. You know what? If I knew that Jesus was going to come back on this particular day right here, you better believe I would be ready. Would you? Would you really? How would you live your life if you knew exactly when He was going to return? Would you be as serious about your faith, or would you tend to take a little advantage of His absence? Just as we talked about the servant last week, didn't we, right? He's like, yeah, guys, I'm just going to level with you here. I don't think He's coming back anytime soon. So on that note, I got all you suckers. And he starts, it says, beating the servants and mistreating the servants, tearing people down rather than building them up. And then the master shows back up. Will we, at the end of all things, church, believers, will we be faithful to what He's called us to do, or will we be frittering away all of the time that He has given to us? Will we be prepared? Or what I term here, I think what these 5 morons do is they have a plan, but I call it a disaster plan. You ever have those moments where you're like, oh, geez, I find myself in a really big pickle here, and I've got to come up with a plan, all right? And what you come up with might be a very great plan, but it's not really a good pre-plan, is it? It's just a plan in the moment to get yourself off of the hook. That's what these 5 foolish bridesmaids do. Don't have any oil, and now we need to go get some oil, and here's the plan, all right? It's called a disaster plan. I really want to highlight what I think is the biggest and the most stark difference between these wise and silly girls. And I think that we sometimes read this parable, and I think to make ourselves feel better, and I think also to be like, you know what, these poor 5 girls, like they didn't do anything all that wrong, did they? We try to fudge this parable a little bit. In fact, I told you earlier, the translation I have here in front of me, I'm like, this isn't good. This is not. Of oil. They didn't have enough of it. The text is very clear, actually, in the original translation. The 5 foolish bridesmaids never brought any oil with them in the first place. I don't know if some of your Bibles might say it that way, but if you go all the way back to the original Greek and you read it as it was written, it says they brought no oil. They were just counting on, like, if I could just fudge things a little bit and I can make it look like, oh, I've got my torch, just like all of you. See how I have my torch too? Like, we all have torches. They're all the same. They might have dipped that rag on the top of the torch in some sort of olive oil or something that would produce a fire. But have you ever this is really embarrassing for me to admit. I shouldn't be admitting this, but because I'm an Eagle Scout, so I should really know how to build a really great fire. Do you want to know a truth about my life? I'm horrible with fires. My tactic when it comes to fire is the more lighter fluid, the better. That's how I start fires. But do you know how things work when you just douse stuff in lighter fluid? What does it do? It looks impressive, doesn't it? Like, yes, I have made fire. And then I think about all those guys before stuff, and they're like out there. But what soon happens after that big whoosh just goes out? That's what happened to these ladies. They're waiting. They have their torch. They have their rag that's been dipped in. I look just like all of you. But they were found out at the moment they had to actually light that torch, right? They actually had to apply. I think what it is, they had to actually apply their faith. Things really started to change at that point. And this seems to be the bigger point that Jesus is trying to make here in telling this parable. Ready? Some are ready, some are not. And again, I think that we try to fool ourselves sometimes. Like, guess what? I mean, if you're in the church, wouldn't you be ready and excited for Jesus to come? Many people are not. I am not preaching this sermon today for you to sit there and be like, you know what, is he pointing me out? Is he pointing his finger at me, like saying that I'm not a real Jew? I don't know. I'm not doing that, but maybe somebody is. The Holy Spirit is his name. I don't know. Some people are ready. Some people are not. It is as clear as that. I would add on to it and say this: some are not really friends of the groom at all. We said the groom was who in this story? It represents who? Jesus. Good job. You can use the Sunday school answer here. It applies. It works. Listen to some people are not really friends. They're friendly towards Jesus, but they're not really friends, true friends of Jesus at all. That is, guys, the sobering truth of this parable. Weddings are no place for strangers. We're like, wasn't he a really big meanie? I mean, that groom, like, why would that girl want to marry him? Because he's just shutting the door in people's faces. It's not mean, it's just the truth. I know that Adam and Aaliyah just celebrated last weekend a wedding. Would it have been really cool for you if you had people showing up to the wedding ceremony, to the reception, and you're like, who in the world is this? Everybody else think of weddings. I know that I've performed the wedding for a few people in here fairly recently. Would it have been cool at your reception or at the wedding? You've been like, who is that schmuck over there? Nobody knows. Weddings are not places for strangers. Only friends and family are permitted to come to the wedding ceremony. The same thing applies to Jesus and God's kingdom. It's not just a free-for-all. Hey, guess what? Anybody come in, it doesn't matter. No, like everybody's welcome, right? But not everybody gets to come in. You have to be wearing the right clothes. You have to have the right invitation, all right? You have to have the right approach to the groom. That's what Jesus is saying here. Jesus is really saying, and as tragic and jarring as this is for most people, and potentially maybe there are some here this morning who have never really heard of this start, is that 5 of these ladies are followers of Jesus. They would be what we would call a disciple of Jesus. And they are waiting, eagerly anticipating and waiting for the return of Christ. And 5 of these ladies are just what Kyle Idleman would term fans. They just want to be part of the entourage. It's the difference between affection and attraction. Guys, attraction can be really fickle. Here's the thing about life. Your little beloved that you married so many years ago, and she was just so beautiful. She's still beautiful to you today, but she looks a little different. He looks a little different, right? Skin has started to wrinkle. Skin has started to sag. That's attraction's like it wanes. It kind of gets fickle sometimes. Do you know what really is enduring though, guys? Affections. If you have affections for someone, affections are really hard to snuff out. I love you because of this. That never changes. Attractions will, affections don't. One pastor puts it this way, I think he really sums up things well of what I've been saying here. As it has to do with these 5 and these 5, he says this: some people in life, some people in the church look the part, but they lack the heart. Guys, many people will do things, but doing things is not necessarily the mark of a vital, lasting relationship with the groom or the master or Jesus himself is, as he uses this image. Here is what is ultra scary to me. The church, not just New Heights Christian Church, the church universal, can very well be filled with a surprising amount of people who are just part of the crowd. But they're not really part of the faith. Because they don't really want to know Jesus at all. They just like to hang out at the church because it makes them feel better. And I hate to use this illustration, but do you ever know people that are like, you know, if I just stay close enough to this person or this group of people, I'd be cool. It doesn't work that way in church life, guys. You don't just have faith because you bump up against other people who have a vibrant faith. You don't just have a vibrant faith because you just get it through osmosis. Like Taryn's thinking, you're like, Brian Jennings is sitting behind me, and I think if I can just maybe Taryn, if you scooted back just like two more pews, you'd be closer to Brian, and your faith, it'd be that much more. Boys and girls. It doesn't work that way. And I know it's not, you're like, well, no, duh, Ryan, it does. But we sometimes act that way, don't we, right? If I just do enough stuff, I keep the plates spinning and I keep people's eyes directed over there, they won't know that even though I have a torch, there's no flame. Makes people feel better. They like to hear but not do. They like to learn but not believe. They want to be a part of the wedding party without getting to know the groom at all. That wouldn't work very well, would it, right? A wedding ceremony, if like the bride has all of her bridesmaids and all like 5 of them are like, you know what? I do not know that dude standing over there. That's a bit of a problem. Bigger problem is this. I know that dude kind of, sort of. I don't like him. That presents a bit of a problem for the wedding party and for the bride, for the groom, for their future together. And as we see in this parable, as it has to do with spiritual things, to have that happen has some very damaging and eternal consequences. Another truth becomes very clear that I think sometimes we just overlook in this, but I think it's super, super important. I think it's what Jesus is trying to drive home, is that you cannot have a relationship with Jesus on borrowed faith. The 5 foolish bridesmaids do what? They realize, we really made a mistake here. We didn't bring 1 drop of oil. And what do they do at that point? They're like, hey, maybe I could mooch off these girls over here. I want to share some of your oil. And what do the 5 wise girls say? Nah. And again, most people look at this parable like, how utterly mean girls is what this is. They will not give any of their oil to the other girls. But here's the thing, the 5 wise ones realize if I give you any of mine, none of us are going to have oil. And then when the bridegroom gets here, guess what? We're going to be in the dark. Everybody will be left in the dark. Jesus apparently, I think, wants to teach to some degree that our individual spiritual preparedness may not be transferred from one individual to another. Kind of what I was talking about over here with Taryn. Like, if I could just... It would be a good idea for Taryn to hang out and be around Brian because he would learn some things and he would get a great model. He would get a great mentor. I promise there are other great people in here besides Brian Jennings. I don't know why I just keep on going back to him. But would we all agree, though, Brian Jennings is kind of a guy like, I just want to be like Brian Jennings. It's good to be around those people. We learn from those people. We grow when we're next to those people, but we can't just like steal those people's faith. They're like, you know what? I don't really want to do anything. I don't really want to get closer to Jesus, but if I can just rip your faith off and make it mine, we're good, right? What does Jesus say in this parable? We're not good with that. The phrase prepared their lamps that Jesus used here, they're awoken, and it says all of them get up and they prepared their lamps. In the original translation, in some translations you might have, it might read trimmed their lamps. It literally means that they put their torches in order. It sounds very familiar to a phrase that we use in our world today, doesn't it? What do we say? That we want to make sure when we get to the end of things we have what? Our affairs in order. That our life is in order, that is prepared to come to an end. They readied their resources. Without the oil, the wedding party was not ready for the bridegroom. That was highly embarrassing, not to mention very dishonoring and disrespectful. And that is really the issue with this whole thing, guys. Not only in this parable, but with the way sometimes the people in the church act is that they're like, you know what, like I just want to be very honest. I don't really care about knowing Jesus that much. I don't care about knowing the groom that well. That's pretty dishonoring, isn't it? It's highly disrespectful. After everything that Jesus has done for us to say, I kind of just want to be close to you, but I really don't want you. Guys, you Every single person, it doesn't matter whether you are 7 years old or you're 70 years old or you're 107 years old. I'm really hoping, Eddie, that you get to 107 so I can use that someday, like 107. It doesn't matter. You have to have your own faith. You can't borrow somebody else's faith. The problem is many have never really actually owned their faith. They've never had their faith tested. They've never given it a test drive to see if they believe is actually what they believe. You cannot sponge off of others. You have to go straight to the source for your faith. And in the end, guys, I think what happens as we look at this parable, these 13 verses here, there are really only two things that separate these 10. Preparedness and what I would call genuineness. All of them show up to wait. All of them identify as part of the wedding party. All of them get sleepy and waiting, but some of them, and only 5 of them, are actually prepared. And as a result, what happens at the very end of this entire story? The groom replies to their cry, "Let us in." We only just forgot. And again, it's not that they forgot oil. They just flat out didn't bring it. What does he say to them? "Believe me, I do not know you." To carry on with the wedding theme that we've been talking about this morning, what is he essentially saying? You're not on the guest list. I've checked it twice, 3 times. You're not there. The gist seems to be that there are maybe those who seem very close and very attached to Jesus, but they're merely in the entourage, and they actually bail when the going gets tough and everything starts to crumble and get hard, and you're like, well, wait, this seems really far-fetched, Ryan. Does it? Is there anywhere in Jesus' ministry where it seemed like he had a massive following, a throng of people who wanted to always be with Jesus, and then they left him? Yeah, it's actually in John chapter 6. John chapter 6, I have to admit, Jesus starts on some wackadoo teaching about eating his flesh and drinking his blood, and people are like, I didn't sign up for this. And it says in John chapter 6, verse 60 and verse 66, it says these words. Many of his disciples, actually most of his disciples said, "This is really hard, Jesus. I don't understand, Jesus, what you're saying. This is, again, not what I signed up for. This is really tough on the faith. How can anyone accept this?" And in verse 66, it says what had to have been one of the lowest points for Jesus at that point in his ministry, most of his disciples turned away and they deserted him. The door is shut in this parable here. The door is shut very really. Certainly to the unbeliever who never tried to get in and get to know the groom, but to the foolish person who never took God seriously enough to honor and love him deeply. It's also not hard not to think back to Jesus' earlier teaching in Matthew chapter 13. It's the parable of the sower, right? And he talks about a second soil type here. He talks about 4 soil types. And the second one he says in verses 5 and 6, other seeds fell on shallow soil with underlying rock. The seeds sprouted quickly because the soil was, what's that word again? He says it twice, shallow. I think he's trying to make a point here. But the plants soon wilted under the hot sun, under the pressures of life. The faith really gets tested, and since they didn't have deep roots, there's this idea of shallowness again, they died. They perished. It didn't make it. When someone doesn't take Jesus very seriously, doesn't take God very seriously, doesn't want to get to know Jesus, the sobering truth is that a time will come when the door is eternally shut. No more chances. Guys, here's what I want to say about this. This is not a parable. Please do not read this parable about people who are serious about their faith and those who aren't so serious about their faith. Some people will read, and people walk away from here today and they're like, Ryan, I'm not really, am I saved or am I not? I'm not doing saved, okay, that's not what I'm playing today. It's not kind of has faith or somewhat has faith. This is the difference between saved and unsaved, or what I like to term believers and those who are just make-believers. The story is not seeking to create uncertainty about and doubt in the heart of the Christian. It's not seeking to rob the Christian of their assurance. We should know and we should be confident and we can be confident in our salvation. But also don't just presume, don't just assume, well, I'm in here, I made it. So I'm just going to sit back now, I'm just going to sip on some sweet tea, I'm just going to ride it out to the end. Guys, we need to stay watchful. We need to prepare those closest to us. And we need to urge this world around us to be ready before the door is shut and they are on the outside looking in for all of eternity. That's the seriousness of this parable and much of Jesus' teaching in Matthew 24 and 25. In the end, what Jesus seems to be saying more than anything is this is the kind of person who can enter the kingdom. And you remember the story in the Gospels where Jesus says, I tell you the truth, it's going to be really, really hard for a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven. And they're all like, what? Then Jesus, how can anyone get in? Oh, I'll tell you how you can get in. And I think he does the same thing here in Matthew 25. I've identified just 4 things and pulled them out of here. Just very quickly here, boom, boom, boom. Guys, the kingdom is not for those who simply respond to an invitation. All of these bridesmaids had seemingly responded to the invitation, right? They show up and they look like they're mostly ready for all of them. The kingdom is also not for those who simply make a confession. If asked, all of these bridesmaids in this story would have certainly said that they were I'm part of the party, yes. These bridesmaids were not indifferent to the groom, really. They were happy to be along for and part of the impending festivities. The kingdom, thirdly, is not for those who merely express some affection. Or some attraction, I guess. Sentiments and intent won't be enough. Well, but Jesus, I meant to. This is really my intent, Jesus. This is some really hard teaching, isn't it? When they say in John chapter 6, Jesus, how could we understand this? This is really hard. I'm going to admit to you, it is hard, isn't it? It's hard to be a kingdom person living in the kingdom. So what in the world does it take to be in the kingdom of God? It's not a checklist or a list of things like I got that. Whew, made it. It's actually fairly simple but very hard to live. The kingdom of heaven is absolutely open to those who endure in their faithfulness. It's all about that one word right there, endurance. All the way to the end. Our faith needs to be lived in the present and it needs to be aimed towards the future. And we don't know how long that future is going to be. We don't know if Jesus is going to come back and he's going to take us into heaven, or we will leave this earth and we will see Jesus face to face. Either way, be ready. Be prepared. Live your life in the best way that you can to the max. You cannot rely on past happenings. You must be living daily for Christ right now. I love the way that Paul says it in 2 Timothy chapter 3. He's talking to his young protege Timothy, and he says, and I want you to listen to these words. Timothy, I would say this, church, you should know this. Don't be surprised by this. In the last days, there will be very difficult times. Well, Ryan, it's really tough to be a Christian sometimes. Yes. Ryan, it just seems like every single year that life goes on, my life gets more confusing and tough. Yes. Well, it seems like this world is just getting more and more evil, and just people are mean. Yes. I want you to know this, Paul says, it will be very difficult in the last times. For people will love only themselves. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? They will love their money. They will be boastful and they will be proud and they will scoff at God and be disobedient to their parents. Nuh-uh, not our perfect children. And they'll be ungrateful. They will consider nothing sacred. Feels like we live in a world where nothing is really sacred anymore, doesn't it? They will be unloving, and they will be unforgiving, and they will slander others, and they will have no self-control. They will be cruel, and they will hate what is good. They will betray their friends and be reckless and be puffed up with pride and love pleasure rather than God. They will act religious. It's a very important phrase here for what we're talking about this morning. But they will reject the power that can make them godly. I'm going to read that again. There will be people who look like they have a lamp like everybody else, but it will not light because they will reject the source and the power that can make that lamp, make that torch be lit. And what does Paul say at the end of that? Stay away from people like that. Like, well, that's kind of mean, isn't it, Paul? It is the truth. There's a guy who's shutting the door in people's faces and saying, you can't come in the party. That sounds mean. It is the truth. I said it last week, if not during the sermon, I said it in morning Bible study, that truth be told, much of what is taught in Matthew 24 and 25 likely addresses a Jewish audience. Matthew is, after all, written to Jewish believers and to the Jewish nation in general. And if that is true, it explains even more why this parable seems to center on one image over and over and over again. What is at the center of this entire parable as far as an image is concerned? Somebody say it really loud. What's that thing up there? Light. Light. You gotta have light. Jesus, throughout the Gospels and his ministry, repeatedly refers to himself and his followers as what? Lights in the darkness, in a dark world. Matthew chapter 5, Sermon on the Mount. You are the light of the world. John chapter 8, Jesus says what? I am the light of the world. God gives the task to the nation of Israel all the way back in the beginning in the book of Genesis to be what? A light to who? The Gentiles. But somewhere along the way they forgot that. And let's be really, really honest, guys. If we want to be very self-aware this morning, sometimes we do too, don't we? We lose our way, we lose our light, and we stop being a witness to the world around us. Maybe that's why Jesus speaks so intently about this oil for the lamps, because it is. The oil in this story is symbolic of the resource, the power, the fuel for the light that is necessary to truly be a part of the wedding party. As someone has termed it, the preparation that allows participation in the celebration. That's what I think Jesus is trying to get to here. You better make sure you have your oil for the lamps. Guys, a lamp or a torch that is not lit is absolutely useless, isn't it? It's like, that looks like a really great torch there, but it's not doing anything, buddy. It reminds me a little bit of the story of the railroad worker who was responsible for, back in the old days, they had to wave the lantern, didn't they, at the crossings to let people know and to kind of warn them and stuff like that. Well, the story goes that this guy was out there, and for some reason, it doesn't tell it in the story, there was a really bad accident. Things went really wrong, and this man found himself in court, and they were kind of questioning him, and they said, sir, were you there that night? Well, yeah. Sir, did you have your lamp that night? Well, yes, I did. Sir, did you wave that lantern? Did you wave that lamp so that you could warn people? Well, yes. And they ended the line of questioning as he was kind of coming off of the stand. He muttered to himself as he left that witness stand, I am so glad they didn't ask me if it was lit or not. And we laugh, and that is funny. What is not funny is us doing that in actual real life with spiritual, eternal, big things. Where might it be in your life that your lamp is flickering and it's about ready to go out? Might it be that the torch that you've been carrying around has hardly been lit at all, actually, in your life? You've doused it with lighter fluid, and it made a really nice woof when you lit it up, but it soon went out because you have no oil that you're carrying with you to keep that flame going. Now, I have to admit, when I read this parable and I listened to some sermons this week, any of you remember, and I learned this song in children's church. You remember the old song, don't you? Give me oil in my lamp, keep me burning, burning, burning. Give me oil in my lamp, I pray. And then we added this when we were kids, hallelujah. All right, anybody else do that part right there? It's like standard, you got to put that in there. And then like over time, like a bunch of other like verses were made up to that song, like, give me gas in my Ford, keep me trucking for the Lord. And I was always like, look at my friends, I'm like, if you had a Ford, you'd never get to Jesus. Like, I'm just kidding. I really didn't do that. They just kept making up verses to it. But that's a cutesy little song. It's a very serious song, isn't it, actually? Guys, may we in our lives be patiently, actively, eagerly, and diligently prepared at all times, ready to go. Eagerly anticipating that the groom is on his way. He could be here any time, and so we ought to keep our light shining bright, not so that he can find his way around, but so that others around us can find their way to him. There are a lot of disasters that can happen at a wedding. I'm sure that we've got some great stories in here of things that went wrong. I remember at my own wedding many years ago, Crystal's poor sister was up on the top of the stage, and she had that moment that when you see something coming, you're like, oh, this is not going to be good, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. She had gone to step off the stage, and in the course of that, her dress had kind of come down a little bit and gotten under her heel, and so she stepped on her own dress, and she literally fell and then kind of tumbled like very awkwardly on some steps off the stage, and I'm just not a nice guy, but inside and kind of audibly, I was like, I don't think she was probably laughing. We can watch people stumble around in life. We're like, look at that fool. It's no laughing matter, especially if that fool, that silly person, that moron is you. The greatest disaster Jesus reveals here is in Matthew 25. The question that should be on our mind will be, at the end of all things, are you ready? More specifically, in your readiness, are you prepared? Are you holding the torch? Is your flame shining brighter and brighter than it ever has, even though the days grow longer and longer between Jesus' first coming and his second? My hope for you, and what we'll pray into this morning, is that for every single one of us here this morning, we won't just be, life is tough. Life bites you. Life gets you down. But we could say, you know what? Despite all of that, I want to endure. I want to be strong. I want to finish well. I want my torch to be shining so bright. A year from now, you can look back and go like, yep, my torch is brighter than it was a year ago. That should always be our goal, just a brighter torch in our lives. Will you pray with me?